Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are so excited to have our very first Gifts of the Plant Nation for the 2023-2024 season be about pseeŋ, wild rice. My name is Claire. I'm the communications manager for Wakan Tipi Awanyankapi. And we've got some really amazing folks here tonight, some of our staff, and then Indigenous knowledge keepers and ecologists who are going to be sharing their knowledge of wild rice. And we're really, really excited to have this program here with you all tonight. Just a couple quick things. Through Zoom, if you have questions for any of the presenters, you can enter in your question in either the chat or the Q&A box. If you're watching from Facebook Live, you can ask any of your questions in the comments, and then what we'll do is at the end of the presentation, we'll have a time for open Q&A. So all of your questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Really quick, just a little bit about our organization, Wakan Tipi Awanyankapi. Our mission statement is engaging people to honor and care for our natural places and the sacred sites and cultural value within them. So we are a Dakota-led, Indigenous-centered environmental stewardship nonprofit. We're located in the east side of St. Paul, and we do a lot of different programs. Most of them are in person. This is, I believe, as of right now, this is our only active webinar series that we have. But a lot of our programs and events are in person. We do classes and events primarily focused towards engaging BIPOC and the American Indigenous community here in the Twin Cities. Two of our big projects are opening Wakan Tipi Center here in St. Paul, and that's set to open in the year 2025. And then also daylighting Phelan Creek, which daylighting essentially means to take a creek that's been moved underground and move it back up to the surface. So if you are interested in learning more about our organization or more about our projects, you can check out our website, wakantipi.org. But tonight we are here to talk about pseeŋ, or wild rice. Pseeŋ is how you say it in Dakota. My Dakota language teachers always told me that when you pronounce the nasal N, which is what you'll see at the end of pseeŋ, it's like that N with the little hook on the bottom of it. The way that you pronounce it is like you're making the N sound without putting your tongue on the roof of your mouth. So it's like pseeŋ. It's like not fully saying the N. That's how you say the word. So tonight we have two of our staff here from Wakan Tipi, Jenna Grey Eagle, our environmental justice educator and stewardship coordinator, and then Gabby Menomin, our restoration manager, who will be sharing their knowledge of wild rice with us tonight. We also will be in a little bit here, we'll be watching a pre-recorded video by Redhorse Taylor. Cole is also the artist who will be designing our graphics and logos for the Gifts of the Plant Nation for this upcoming season. He did the wild rice one. I love it. It's so cool. And he could not be here with us tonight, but he wanted to share some experiences that he's had with harvesting traditional Dakota wild rice harvesting practices in his community in Prairie Island. So we'll be watching that video. And then Michael Dockry from the U of M's Department of Forest Resources will be sharing some of his knowledge and some of the projects that he's been working on recently that are connected to wild rice. So without further ado, we have a video here, and let me make sure that I can get all the tech stuff set up for it to make sure that everybody can see. There we go, see the video.
Hamutakiepi, Tashuntan Karuta Imakiapi, Mdewakanton Dakota. Hello, my friends and relatives. I'm Cole Redhorse Taylor. I am from the Prairie Island Indian community, and we are Mdewakanton Dakota. And I'm here today to talk about our relationship as Dakota people, as Isanti Dakota people in Minnesota, with wild rice with what we call pseeŋ. Um, as far as I understand, the four bands of Eastern Dakota known as the Isanti, whose where our traditional homelands are what we call Minnesota, which is within the boundaries of the state of Minnesota. We have been historically we have been a wild rice culture. We were known for cultivating wild rice, just as our Anishinaabe relatives and our Menominee and Potawatomi and Sac and Fox relatives around us that were our neighboring tribes, just so in the way that they also were known for harvesting and gathering wild rice. There was a really big tradition for Dakota people to do that, but what caused our relationship to that traditional food source to be strained was the impact of colonization and the removal of Dakota people from our traditional homelands in the 1860s, and then with the removal and afterward came the return of a lot of Dakota people to our traditional homelands. That tradition kind of sort of went away for a really long time, but and I think maybe in other Dakota communities that wild rice tradition may have remained, but it was not really that strong. And also, it has to also do with the environmental impact of colonization as well, because many of our traditional ricing areas in the lakes within our sort of traditional territory, in the southern part of Minnesota, as the Anishinaabe people kind of have more of the northern part of the state. Our ricing areas kind of became very, very more and more extinct and more rare to find rice in this part of the state. And so, to my knowledge, at least I can only speak for what kind of happened in my community, was in 2011, there was an effort to reintroduce wild rice to our area here in our community that is against the Mississippi River. We made an effort to reseed the wild rice here, and we understood at the time, the way that it was explained to us was that it takes many, many years for the rice to sort of take root and germinate and to grow and to thrive. And so we knew that it would be kind of a really long process, and so I was there in 2011 when we planted the rice using the sort of like paddy, like rice mud technique, where you make a little mud ball and then you put it in the water in a more shallow area of the water. But we also understood that with the river being so ever changing, the water levels would sometimes affect the way that the wild rice grows. And so that was many over 10 years ago now, and we were excited to see in the last couple of years that the rice had finally kind of grown and germinated and flourished. And so a lot of people in the community started to work to harvest the rice in the traditional manner. And this past fall I was able to be present when some people wanted to go out and harvest the wild rice, and so it was really exciting to go out and do that part. And it was really a really big learning process for all of us too, and it really felt good to know that we were harvesting traditional food, which we do in other ways already, because we have a buffalo herd here in the community that we utilize to feed our community members, and to when we have feasts and when we invite people over, we have that traditional food source to feed them as well. And we're really fortunate that effort has really remained strong for since the entirety of my lifetime. And so it was really nice to know that we were going out harvesting the wild rice in this traditional sort of way that's kind of been done since time immemorial, since Dakota people have harvested wild rice. And we went out on the canoes, and we went out to where the rice was, and we harvested it, and it's a lot of hard work, but it is really beautiful work, and there's it's an opportunity for us to get close to, like, to Unshimakad, like to Mother Earth, and to know that we're doing this also really respectfully. And before we went out, we all offered tobacco to the water, to to offer up something for safe passage, which we assume that our ancestors had done many years ago, when they were harvesting rice all the time, and asking for prayers to the spirits in the water to give us safe passage over and back. And we went out there, and it was amazing to be amongst the rice, and to the rice stalks, which grew really, really tall. They were really, really tall stalks, which I don't know if that's a rarity, or what that had to do with our rice growing, but it was just really cool to be out there doing that. And I was able to push the canoe, and then my cousin was knocking the rice into the boat, and then I understood that it is hard work, and it's a lot of work to knock all of the rice into the canoe, but it was just really fulfilling. I mean, while we're working to fulfill our houses and our homes and our stomachs, with this traditional food, it was just really fulfilling to know that, like, we're doing this work, that our ancestors did a long time ago, and that we're kind of bringing it back in a way. I was really thankful for my cousin Winona Owen, who took it upon herself to, like, kind of learn a lot of these steps, and she helped us all work through all of this, because I had never gone ricing before. I'd never been able to go to a different community and help anybody harvest wild rice, and so it was really amazing to do that. And we had fun doing it. It was just really nice to forget the world that we live in currently, and just go out there and just harvest the rice and bring it back. But one thing we also were kind of, when we were out there, we were kind of really aware of, was that we lived upstream from a power plant, and so I was really thinking of how maybe maybe if that wasn't there, maybe this rice would have grown here a lot sooner, or a lot sooner than what we thought it would. And uh, the sort of disturbance of the motorboats and the barges that are going by, outside of where we were harvesting the rice on the river. I understand those can often harm rice environments, and we're really thinking about all of that, and thinking of, like, that's kind of what often keeps us away from getting this wild rice, and so we also understood how fragile this food source is, and I think that's what's really been amazing about it. So the last part I'll get into is that my designs for this program, talking about wild rice, I was immediately inspired after we went ricing to create a design in the Dakota floral style, of talking about wild rice, talking about pseeŋ, and I had fun doing it, and then I was glad that that they were able to reach out to me to ask for me to use that design for this, and I think it was just really rightfully so. And I'm excited to continue working with them about creating some of these designs for the Gifts of the Plant Nation. I think it's really amazing work, and the conversation should continue about Dakota people, being active in harvesting wild rice, and then I hope that many other Dakota communities are able to continue this tradition as well. So I'm excited to see where that will go one day. And I just want to say thank you, Pidama, for giving me the time to talk about this, and hopefully I'll be out there again next year harvesting rice. So thank you.
Hidamayaye so much, Cole, for sharing your wisdom and your experience with bringing back wild rice harvesting to your community. I think, oh, and Cole also shared, let's see if my screen will work here. There we go. He also shared some photos of his experience that he wanted us to share with everybody too. I think that this is a really important practice that was taken from Dakota people that was largely lost due to colonization. And it's really amazing and beautiful to see it start to return in ways like this. And so our next speaker is our environmental justice educator and stewardship coordinator, Jenna Grey Eagle. And Jenna's going to talk a little bit about the nutritional and medicinal benefits of wild rice. So I'll let you take it away, Jenna.
Okay, sounds good. Hamadakiapi nape matowia makiapi. My name is Jenna Grey Eagle, and as Claire was talking about, I'm the environmental justice educator and stewardship coordinator here at Wakan Tipi Awanyankapi. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here talking about the nutritional and medicinal benefits of pseeŋ or wild rice with everyone tonight. And yeah, as Cole and Claire were talking about, I thought, yeah, it's just really important to talk about how this was such like a staple food for Dakota people, and it was once in really high abundance. Even here in the Twin Cities, I think a lot of people don't realize that when we talk about wild rice with folks, that a lot of our work actually talks about the cultural aspect of Dakota people, and a lot of that had to do with wild rice because it was such a staple food, and that's because it's a whole grain, nutrient dense food. And so I think it's just really important to highlight that being in restoration, that being a restoration project is really important. And I think that it's just really inspiring to hear the stories of Prairie Island and how they've looked to cultivate wild rice and how they've looked to bring it back because it's such an important plant, and to reintroduce the plant and have it actually be successful is really inspiring to me. But yeah, if we can go to the next slide, please. So I base this nutritional information kind of off of 2 servings of wild rice because it's kind of recommended that people eat anywhere between 1/3 to 2/3 of a cup of wild rice, but it kind of made the information a little confusing. So I just went with 2 servings. And so it just made it a little easier to read the nutrient information. And there's still a lot of research being done on wild rice, which I know Mike and Gabby are going to talk about a lot more. But I think it's important to make the distinction between wild rice and whether it's hand harvested or whether it's paddy rice. So paddy rice is kind of grown, or it's kind of cultivated in like a much more, I don't know it very well. I know Gabby and Mike can talk about it better, but it just doesn't lead to as much nutrients as hand harvesting does. So if you're looking for the nutrient dense wild rice, you're gonna want to look for the words hand harvested and wood parched. That's gonna lead to a lot more nutrients for you. And so if you look at cultivated rice, it's a lot more black and shiny, and black and shiny is more so the paddy rice, whereas if you see like a multicolor of like brown and cream, that's actually going to be a lot better. And hand harvested is a lot more expensive, but it's worth it just based off the nutrients alone. And so yeah, if you can go to the next slide. So in addition to the fact that, wild rice has like a really healthy amount of fiber, antioxidants and vitamins, antioxidants are also really important for preventing heart disease. Sorry, I know I accidentally duplicated antioxidants in there, but it also has like a really good amount of manganese, magnesium, and copper. And then it's also anti-inflammatory. So it's different from other grains in the fact that it's not acid forming like most grains are. It's actually alkaline forming. So it actually makes for really great anti-inflammatory. It also has alpha lipoic acid, which is also a really great antioxidant, which can prevent diseases like diabetes, and then also enhances digestion. And I also want to note that unfortunately wild rice is really prone to pollution, so you want to wash it really well so that you can avoid arsenic and lead and cadmium, because you can find trace amounts of that in wild rice sometimes. And so, yeah, like I said, just look for hand harvested or wood parched when you're looking for wild rice. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And here's a recipe that Gabby actually shared. She actually said to take out the Dijon mustard if you're not a mustard fan, and she actually replaced the shallots with onion powder. And then you can also replace the egg with unsweetened applesauce, because that can help the bison to not dry out. And also, instead of using breadcrumbs, you can use panko. And yeah, if anybody I'm just gonna give people a minute to take a picture of this. Gabby swears by this recipe if you want non-dry bison meatballs. And yeah, you can go to the next slide. And then here is a popped wild rice recipe. So this is like if you don't want to eat like like a wetter variety of wild rice, you can actually pop it kind of like popcorn, and it'll just make it like a lot lighter, and you can use it kind of like as a garnish. This is also something that Gabby taught me, but it sounds really good and I really want to try it. But it also is important to note that it's not going to pop like popcorn, so you have to listen to it really carefully. So it's not going to fly up against the lid like a popcorn would. It would actually, you'd have to sit there and listen for it to be done. And it only takes about 7 minutes, which is awesome. And if you can go to the next slide. And I just wanted to shout out these native-owned businesses that that sell pseeŋ or wild rice products. So Native Harvest is based out of White Earth, and they're hand-harvested wild rice. They offer half a pound up to an entire pound of wild rice. And then you have Mino Mishkiki or Good Medicine. So they offer kind of more bulk items. So you can get anywhere from half a pound all the way up to 20 pounds of hand-harvested wild rice. And they're native owned family business. So it'd be really awesome to support them if you're looking for nutrient dense wild rice. And then you also have Red Lake Nation Foods, which I'm not sure if this is true, but I read it somewhere that Red Lake Nation Foods is the only tribally owned wild rice harvesting food store in all of Minnesota. So there's like families that own a lot of wild rice companies, but Red Lake's the only tribe that actually owns a wild rice store. And then they ask on the website to go to nawapo.com if you're looking to order any. And yeah, I think that's it for me. And I hand it off to Gabby.
Thank you so much, Jenna. I've heard it said that wild rice can help improve your memory, actually. So there's some food for thought. Just kidding. I actually don't. That's just a stupid pun. But anyways, Gabby is here to talk a little bit more about the ecological roles and kinship with pseeŋ or wild rice. So I'll let you take it away, Gabby.
Bojo Jayak, Kwekabnok Dijnakas, Wisconsin Dujbaya, Wasi and Dodem. Hi everyone, my name is Gabby Menomin. I am the restoration manager at Wakan Tipi Awanyankapi. I come from the Forest County Potawatomi community up in northern Wisconsin, and today I'm going to talk about some of the ecological roles and the kinship that pseeŋ has with our animal relatives, with the habitats that it grows in. But I just wanted to kind of build off of what Jenna was saying. So that meatball recipe that actually is a slightly modified version of the recipe that comes from a cookbook that Dream of Wild Health made. I had just modified the recipe because there were some things in there that me and my family weren't a huge fan of. There was ingredients that we didn't have, and the applesauce was actually kind of a mistake ingredient that I kind of stumbled upon because we had run out of eggs at my house. And I know that in a banana bread recipe that my mom shared with me, that she substituted eggs with applesauce. And so I was like, oh, I'll just try it because I really want these meatballs, but I don't have any eggs right now. And it actually turned out really well and helped with the dryness that you can sometimes experience with buffalo. But yeah, I just wanted to say I got that recipe from a Dream of Wild Health cookbook. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that I know there's a community somewhere up north that is using the wild rice hulls after they're all done with the processing, and they're going to be trying to see if they can use those wild rice hulls as a mulch substitute to kind of reduce the nitrogen that gets sucked up from the soil when you use wood mulch. That's just something really cool that I learned about this fall, or earlier towards the end of the summer, early fall. I heard about there's a community somewhere up in northern Minnesota that's going to be testing that out. Okay, sorry. With all that, now we're going to get into some more information about wild rice. So if we want to go to the next slide. Oh, and that map on the other side, that was a map that was created from a community up in Canada, I believe. And that was just a map of different ways that different communities say wild rice. So I wanted to include that because wild rice is important to so many different communities. And as I'll show you here, wild rice is very spread out and abundant, and it's historically where it grew was actually much larger than what we are currently seeing. So there are 3 species of wild rice that live here in the United States. There is also a species that grows over in Asia. But the 3 species of wild rice that we have here, 2 of them grow here in Minnesota. That's the Zizania aquatic and the Zizania palustris. And so that's just kind of that map on the left is a distribution of where it grows here in the United States. The Zizania texana grows in a tiny little section over in Texas there. And so on the right here, the Minnesota DNR has a map of all the different wild rice lakes and rivers that are currently here in Minnesota. Again, this back in the day before there was so much habitat disturbance, there would have been wild rice throughout much of the state, actually, in many of our wetland and aquatic systems. So if we want to go to the next slide. So a little bit of background about wild rice. So wild rice is an annual plant, which means that it is a new plant every single year. Wild rice is also the Minnesota state grain as well. So wild rice is not actually rice. It is part of the grass family, the Poaceae family. Other members of this family include some of our major prairie grasses, such as big blue stem, little blue stem, buffalo grass. And wild rice has over 150 grass relatives that live just in the state of Minnesota itself. The grass family is a very large family that is spread out throughout the world, which is really kind of cool. So for the habitat, wild rice likes to grow in lakes, flowages, rivers. It really prefers shallow water, anywhere from 1/2 foot to 3 feet. And it does like some water flow, some very light water flow. It prefers to grow in lakes and rivers that have a very mucky bottom, but it can also grow in some sandy conditions as well, although it really prefers that thick, soft substrate. Wild rice also really likes to grow in areas with low water turbidity, so it really likes clear, clean, healthy waters because it is really susceptible to higher water acidities, high sulfate levels, susceptible to pollution from sewage treatment runoff, mining, things like that. So wild rice is actually, if there's wild rice growing in an area, and especially if it's growing in abundance, it's a really good indicator of high water quality in the aquatic habitat. Some things to kind of keep in thinking about where wild rice grows. So it really likes that calm, clear water with a really mucky bottom. Let's see if we want to, Oh, also, I wanted to talk about some of the plants that like to grow with wild rice. So some plants that you'll commonly see with wild rice are broadleaf arrowhead, which the Dakota name is pseeŋ, which means, I believe it means children of the wild rice, because it grows underneath wild rice, because wild rice is a very tall plant, and the broadleaf arrowhead is a shorter plant compared to it. So that's a plant that likes to grow along wild rice. You'll also commonly see some cardinal flower growing, pickerel weed, lilies, reeds, cattails, things like that. And oh, I also wanted to share a story about our organization and a huge project that Claire had mentioned in the beginning, that connects with wild rice. So that daylighting Phelan Creek, where we're trying to bring Phelan Creek back up to the surface, that creek historically had run from the south end of Lake Phelan here in St. Paul. It meandered through the east side of St. Paul and connected to Wakan Tipi at Bruce Bento Nature Sanctuary, what it's now called, and connected into the Mississippi. And so this creek was a very important corridor for Dakota and other Indigenous people to access the Phelan chain of lakes from the Mississippi. And people would often use that creek corridor to be able to access wild rice beds that grew in White Bear Lake. So that's a really cool connection that our organization and the work that we do has with wild rice. So I wanted to bring that story up because it's very near and dear to my heart, because it's a major project that I'm working on, and very important to the kind of broader story of our organization as well, and why we do the work that we do. So if we want to go to the next slide. So some identification for wild rice. It's really important to know what life stage you are working with, because wild rice is going to look different depending on the time of the year. So we'll start here with circle number 1, which is seed germination, which usually happens in the spring. After it has spent the winter in the muck, the seed will start to germinate in early spring. And then step number 2 in its life cycle, it goes into the submerged leaf phase, where several leaves are produced and it's living underwater, it's submerged underwater. Then it goes into stage 3 by the early summer, where the plant produces ribbon-like leaves that float on the water surface. This is that floating leaf stage. And then it starts developing these aerial shoots by mid to around midsummer. It starts producing those. You'll start seeing these stems pop up, and by the end of the summer, or towards the end of the summer, it starts to develop the flower heads, and the flower heads are actually have both male and female parts on them. So you see the middle 2 images, the male flower is actually on the bottom half, and the female flower is on the top half of that stem. And then so that's flowering by the end of the summer, and end of the summer, early fall is when the seeds start to ripen, and that's when people go out and start harvesting the rice, is when those seeds are ripe. And whatever seeds are left over, those will go into the muck and will overwinter until the next year. And some things to note about wild rice. It's dependent on wind for pollination, so it needs wind to be able to disperse the pollen amongst itself. The seeds are also very narrow like cylinders, and this helps them actually when they fall off the plant. This helps them to be able to kind of dive into the water and into the muck, so they're able to stay within that seed bank there and come up next year. Also, something to note, seed production and ripening does vary from year to year, kind of like how oaks will have bumper crops. Wild rice kind of has years of really high production and really low production. So that's something to keep in mind. And wild rice is a very large plant. It can get up to 10 feet in length, with 6 to 8 feet of that being above the water. So it's a very tall plant. If we want to go to the next slide. So yeah, you can see in that that bottom right image just how tall that the rice can actually be. Those are some guys out there harvesting the rice. And this is just kind of, I wanted to share this picture to show kind of how expansive these areas of wild rice can be when they're healthy and they have the habitat needs, and their habitat needs are being met. If we want to go to the next slide. So I want to talk about some of the kinship roles that wild rice has with different wildlife. And it's crazy because just thinking about all the different nutritional benefits that wild rice has that Jenna went over, it makes sense why wild rice has such a huge role for wildlife. So it's obviously a source of food. The seed grains itself are food for different waterfowl, such as geese, swans, sora rails as well. Migratory birds as well depend on the seeds. And because of the time that wild rice seeds, it's perfect for those migratory birds as they're heading south for the winter. They're able to grab up the nutrient-packed seeds from the wild rice to be able to continue their journey down south. Muskrats also will eat the shoots of the wild rice. I know swans and I think geese also eat the shoots as well. Muskrats use the shoots for to build their homes, their lodges, things like that. And then there's the rice worm, which is at the bottom. It's actually a type of moth. Those worms will eat the leaves, and then their larvae will go into the roots and the shoots as well and eat those. So wild rice is really a very important food source for a lot of different wildlife. And the sora rail, which is that bird in the upper right corner, during the fall, around 94% of their diet can consist of just wild rice grain. So this is a species that is very dependent on wild rice to sustain healthy populations. Other ways that wildlife use and work with wild rice, waterfowl will use it for roosting and for cover. Birds will use it for nesting and lofting. Aquatic invertebrates use it for cover, and it's also small fish and frogs will also use it as cover. It's kind of like a nursery. It can be used as nursery grounds for those young fish and frogs as well, which creates hunting grounds for things like herons and loons, other larger animals that use those smaller animals and invertebrates as food as well. So it's really kind of a hub for wildlife. The wildlife are really dependent on wild rice habitats as well, especially when you get those really thick patches of wild rice. It's great, great for sustaining all sorts of different animals as well. Let's see if we want to go to the next slide. And so thinking about the ecological role of wild rice. So when it creates those dense patches, it's really great for creating a buffer to slow down winds, especially across shallow wetlands. This helps with reducing waves, which can have an impact on shore erosion as well. So wild rice helps reduce shore erosion when you get those dense thickets by slowing down the wind. Like I had mentioned earlier, it's an indicator of high water quality in the habitats or in the ecosystems that it grows in. And it actually helps maintain water quality and clarity by binding loose soils, tying up nutrients, again, slowing the winds that go across the shallow wetlands. And by doing all of this, it helps. It can also help by reducing algae blooms as well. And so something that I kind of wanted to touch on was the sustainable harvesting of wild rice. So because it is an annual plant, meaning that those plants that you see each year are going to die off, and it's dependent on the seeds that are in the seed bank after. It's really important to practice sustainable harvesting. So one thing that I've heard from Ojibwe communities is that when you're out there and you're knocking the rice into your boat, you want to make sure that you always knock some rice back into the water as well. So that's really important to think about if you are considering harvesting wild rice, making sure that you're putting seed back into the environment, making sure that you're not taking from the whole area. Again, because wildlife is so dependent on the species, it's important to practice leaving some behind for our animal relatives as well. Because wild rice, like as Cole mentioned, it can take a really long time to restore wild rice back to an area. I know in his community that he said it took them around 10 years. Typically for wild rice, if conditions are favorable, it can take 3 to 5 years, much like our prairie systems, for wild rice to start even for wild rice to start to even be established to an area. And that doesn't include the time that it takes for it to become established enough to be able to sustain harvesting as well. So it's really important to practice some of those sustainable harvesting practices of making sure you're leaving enough wild rice out there for the environment and for the animals. When you're out there knocking, make sure to be helping with the seed dispersal and knocking them back into the water as well. If we want to go to the next slide. And some invasive species that are of concern for wild rice are the narrow-leaf cattail. So this looks very similar to our native cattails that live here, except the narrow-leaf cattail, like the name suggests, has these really, really thin, narrow leaves. Narrow-leaf cattail can also hybridize with our native cattails. That's something that people are having to consider now, as well as more research comes out about the hybridization of the two cattail species. And a major one that causes a lot of concern is Eurasian water milfoil also. And so these two invasive species, what's concerning for wild rice populations is that they grow so densely that they shade out the wild rice during its early stages of life when it's underwater and submerged. So that's a huge concern as well. Another invasive species that I didn't put on here, but should probably mention, is the carp as well, the invasive carp species. And this has kind of come up into conversations about how that carp species might impact rice beds up north, because the carp can really decimate any native plant population that it lives in. So that's a concern about the carp species moving up the water bodies and the water systems to rice beds up north, is that it could end up decimating the wild rice beds up there. So those are just some species that I wanted to kind of touch on, but I think that's all I have for now. I'll pass it on over to Claire.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Yeah, I think it's really, really important. Oops, we're not doing Q&A yet. I think it's really important for us to recognize that when we take care of a plant relative, we're not just taking care of it for that specific plant. We're not just taking care of it, for our own benefit as humans, but practicing that Dakota value, wotakuye, or kinship, means that you are protecting one plant for the benefit of the whole ecosystem, for all the other plants and animal relatives that will benefit from having that plant there. And with wild rice specifically, it used to be so abundant in the area that's now known as the Twin Cities, and it has been largely lost. And so being able to bring back that plant relative for the benefit of humans and the ecosystem and the plant relatives is not only culturally important, but ecologically a really beautiful and important thing to see. And yes, it's a lot of work, but hey, no pain, no gain. So anyways, we're going to move on to our next guest speaker is Mike Dockry. He is a assistant professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Forest Resources, and he has a few of his own slides that he's going to share. So I'm going to pass over the screen sharing abilities. I just turn this off. And yeah, and hopefully, there we go. Perfect. So I will let you take it away, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks. Bonjour, Danwe Maganak, Quab Met Mashike Manise Indigenous, Chona Kendison and Dodem, Nishnave and Dao, Bodwadme and Dao, Shishibani and Dem and Dagwis. Hello, everybody. It's really good to be here. So fun to come after hearing such nice presentations. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research that we've been doing at the university in conjunction with a number of tribal partners to look into how wild rice is sort of faring on the landscape and help with these restoration activities, help to protect wild rice where it is growing well and make sure that that continues. I'll show a few maps, but wild rice is declining across the region, and it has declined quite a bit. We talked a little bit about wild rice declining here in the Twin Cities area itself, but when you look from Michigan over to Wisconsin and then here to Minnesota, in Michigan, the rice has really been decimated, and it's just a fraction of what used to grow there. That nice range map that Gabby showed kind of gives you an idea that it was all over the United States, the Eastern and Midwest. And now it really isn't. Michigan is having a lot of trouble. Wisconsin, it's been in decline. And in Minnesota, it's declined slightly, but not as much. And so we're really concerned about wild rice, particularly here in Wisconsin. And then, like I said, in Minnesota. And then, like I said, in Wisconsin and Michigan, people are really trying to do restoration. This is a map. So I'm Citizen Potawatomi. And this is a map that John Lowe, who's a Pokagon Potawatomi tribal member, created. And it shows our Anishinaabe or Anishinaabe migration story and kind of our route where we took. So we started, and again, if you look at that wild rice map that you saw, Gabby, that's pretty cool to kind of think about these things in conjunction with each other. And so we migrated the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Odawa. We came through the St. Lawrence Seaway into the Great Lakes area here. My relatives stayed kind of at the southern part of Lake Michigan there. Others continued on the Ojibwe here in the state and north. And some of the prophecy about what, how do we know where we're going and when we're going to stop is finding this plant that's really growing, quite nicely on the water here and to feed us. And that would be our home. And so this is a really, I think, an important context for my own understanding of why I'm engaged with this work. And here's a nice Smithsonian depiction of a wild rice harvest. These were created in the late 1800s, typically. I didn't check the date on this one, I can't remember. But I'll also note that you see women here harvesting the rice. And women have played a very important role in wild rice harvesting over time. And it is a pleasure to be here with such smart women on this call. While those were sort of long time ago understandings of it, our communities continue to celebrate wild rice. So this is a wild rice powwow at St. Croix there. So this is historical and contemporary, as we've been hearing. If you go to the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Hochikata Cultural Museum, you will find a really nice exhibit with a canoe and wild rice. So folks, if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend that. This, as we've been hearing, is very important for Dakota people as well. So, okay, we've talked, Gabby really set me up. So some of these slides might be kind of the same, but I want to talk a little bit about these wild rice ecosystems. Like we heard, shallow water, a little bit of flowing water in both rivers as well as lakes. This is kind of what we're looking at. And you can see some of those animal relatives there, as well as some of our human relatives doing some harvesting. Why has wild rice been declining? There's all sorts of different environmental and other reasons that I'll kind of go through these, but one is water level. So having waters that are, when dams are put in or culverts on roads that change that hydrology to either raise the water or have it being stagnant throughout the year, that can really impact. And this is I'm going to show the life cycle again like Gabby did, but here's kind of cool. You can see the actual seeds. So as Gabby mentioned, this is an annual plant. Every year new seeds need to grow to have the plant. So these are the seeds. You can see the little roots starting coming down. Water level at that time, you can imagine it's kind of sitting in this muck. It's starting to grow, gets to that floating leaf stage there. You can imagine what might happen if the water rises. Suddenly those roots aren't very big. It can pull the plant and kind of wash it down. So depending on what time of the growing cycle water happens or water levels change is really important to think about why wild rice is either growing very well or having some hard times. And then here's when it's standing up at the end there, and you can see some of those beautiful flowers. Also, as Gabby mentioned, contaminants are a real concern for wild rice. Particularly, you have different kinds of runoff. You have mining, and runoff from mining is very has been tied to negative impacts for wild rice or to hurt the rice. And here you see sulfide, and those are the mines that have been proposed in the northern part of the state here. Other mines too proposed in Wisconsin, etc. But the wild rice is really sensitive to these this sulfate in particular, but other contaminants as well. There's other either invasive species or competitive plants that are the tribal partners that I work with. They tell me, if this wild rice is there and the water's kind of the same level, you can get some of these other, there's that arrowweed, some lily pads there coming in, and then it's real hard for that rice to kind of come up. Those other species can really outcompete rice. And then Gabby had some of the other invasive species that she talked about. And then a big one is climate change that's impacting wild rice. So you can imagine the different runoffs that we have. High rain events, particularly in the early part of the summer, can really, flooding that could raise the water as that leaf is floating. It can just pull the roots up, and then the plant can go down either the river or be kind of washed out into the lake. Those are things that we're seeing with climate change, right? Increased rainfall, heavy rains, that heavy precipitation. Another thing that our research is starting to find is that it's really important to have cold winters for wild rice. Wild rice needs those seeds when they're sitting in the muck, they need to get cold. And as our winters are warmer, as the ice is shallower, not as thick, as it comes on later and goes off earlier, these are all things that we're finding is correlated to poor outcomes for wild rice. So climate change is a big one. Other stressors, yeah, you can see this. There we go. That's like the massive flooding that we've been seeing, and in conjunction with our infrastructure, culverts, bridges, and things that kind of hold that water in there, and we have these washouts. That's not very good for the wild rice. Also, other things I'm talking about, what impacts wild rice? Why do we see this change in abundance? One of the things that's been stressed upon a lot of the tribal partners we work with is that these changes in harvesting. We've been talking right now about the importance of our peoples to get back out on that water and reform those bonds that we have with our relative wild rice, pseeŋ or Menomin. And our changes in harvesting have really, some of our tribal partners say we're not out there as much. That's one of the things that's negatively impacting it. So we hear all this stuff. I'm going to now talk a little bit about our partnerships for a couple minutes here. I'm at the University of Minnesota, like was said, and I talk to a lot of tribes around the region, and wild rice is a big concern. And so we start thinking, how can we support the tribes in their goals to restore and protect wild rice? We had a bunch of meetings where we kind of came together. We had several different types of scientists we have hydrologists, we have aquatic ecologists, we have social scientists. I'm sort of an interdisciplinary scientist, so I do a lot of ecology, but I'm also interested in how our cultures are playing out and what we value in our natural resources. So we got together and basically, you know, what we learn in our project is listening to our elders, listening to the importance of wild rice, and listening to what the tribes really need. Gabby mentioned the different cultural, I think it was Gabby, sorry, the cultural versus the cultivated wild rice. And here you see, oh, Jenna said that, I'm sorry, Jenna. And here you see kind of a picture. And one of the things we heard was that there was a lot of strong feelings against the University of Minnesota for developing that cultivated wild rice. There are many reasons why some of the tribes were really not in favor of what the university was doing, including the breeding of those different cultivated varieties. There's a concern because it's a wind pollinated species that potentially pollen drift could go and change natural wild rice stands and start to have, you know, hybrids between the cultivated and the natural. There's concerns that this wild rice, and I don't know if you can see me, I have some wild rice with me, actually harvested by some of the students on our project. That concerns about the genetics there of that rice changing. What farmers do when they cultivate the wild rice is they want the plant to ripen at the same time. Natural wild rice stands, you can go in and harvest over time. You can go in and a few days later come back, and the grain itself is ripening at different times. And that's a nice ecological system to ensure that we, you know, aren't taking everything, or that the ducks and geese don't take everything at the same time. It's essentially the ecological mechanism of sharing, right? Farmers want to go in there once and harvest everything. So having rice ripen at the same time is really important. And the other thing that farmers want to do is use machinery. So they don't want the rice, like we knock the rice with our sticks, that is called, the scientists say, shattering. That creates the rice kind of pops off the plant and into the boat or into the water. And they don't want that. They want it to kind of stay on so they can harvest it like other grains that they might harvest in the field. Those are two characteristics that are not, that are kind of against that ecological niche that wild rice has. So we heard that from our tribes. We heard about the contamination. We heard that University of Minnesota really has done a lot of harm. And that was an important step for us to start working with tribes. We developed protocols. You don't have to read all this, but basically I highlighted that any research that we do with Indigenous communities on tribal lands must have full consent of the tribe. And if they have either the tribe's research board or the tribal council or their natural resource boards, whatever institute that the tribe has, like they have to be in full agreement, and we're serving the tribes, and this is a way that we can put it on paper and hold ourselves accountable for ethical research. Now, after doing this, meeting, listening, sketching out some protocols that we would follow, I think this is where I can start saying that our project, the Kawe Gada Nana Gadawendamin Menomin, or First We Must Consider Wild Rice Project, this is kind of where we really start to take off. And we have a lot of different partners and people that come to our calls. We have monthly meetings, we have conferences. There's a conference coming up in November. I think it's November 8th up at Fond du Lac. People want to look into that, I can probably get that information. But this is a list right here of different organizations that have actually, like, we have formal agreements with. Well, Karen Diver is part of the university now, but we've signed those research protocols with the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, Fond du Lac, Lac du Flambeau in Wisconsin, Mille Lacs, St. Croix, 1854 Treaty Authority, and the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. We made a concerted effort to be reaching out and talking with the Dakota communities here. And so we have quite good participation from three of the Dakota communities here in Minnesota. but we haven't really got this far with formal agreements yet to do actual research. We're at the sharing information stage and listening to each other stage. Here's kind of the sites that we work at, scattered throughout mostly Wisconsin and Minnesota. And what are we doing? So I'm going to talk about some of the research that we've done. I've mentioned that harm that the genetics, the breeding and genetics program at the university has caused to both wild rice as well as to tribal communities. And so there was a need to build trust. So the first research we started doing was just measuring sort of the levels, water levels. That was seen as something like that we could work together on. It was something that was not controversial. Research information coming out about water levels was not going to cause problems with tribes and their sovereign stances on things like mining, for example. We started getting a little bit more and started doing some sediment coring, and then finally started looking at actual water chemistry, nutrients, sulfates, sulfides, iron, and kind of trying to understand how that's impacting rice. We also do a lot of surveys. So we're looking at tracking, helping tribes track what's going on with the rice. Tribes are doing that already, but we're supporting where we can and where they want to expand. Another thing we're looking at is, what does the forest look like next to wild rice stands that are healthy? What does the forest look like, or what does the land use look like around wild rice bodies that are not healthy? And what can we learn from that? How can we manage? I'm a forester. How can we manage the trees? How can we manage the upland sites to support that wild rice, that healthy wild rice? Also, a lot of the work, like I mentioned, I do is cultural. And so in starting to engage in oral history interviews to have stories about how wild rice has changed over time and why that is, because our tribal knowledge really has something to say here and can help us understand how to move forward with that protection, with that management. Also looking at archives to understand change over time. The Army Corps of Engineers put in a lot of dams in this region, not the big ones like you think of out west, but smaller ones, put in culverts. And there are records of that and records of what the government was doing on purpose to change those, our indigenous foodways. There was a lot of conscious destruction of wild rice habitat that the government was perpetuating in order to shift us into sort of, I guess, American farmers. And then we've also done a lot of research looking at how we can work together. How do university scientists work with tribal communities? And that's been something that we've been ongoing and constantly assessing, because we believe that we can build strong partnerships by understanding how to work together and having the tribes lead this project. So I didn't say it explicitly, but our project is led by the tribes. We take our orders from the tribe on what they want to see, what the communities want to see, and then we move forward with that. I look at research as service. I'm serving the tribal communities. That's why as a forester, I'm working on wild rice quite a bit. And then finally, I just have one more slide. These are nice, but some of the things that we've learned in our partnership, that how do we approach this? We've learned that this collaboration and partnership building has to happen with individual tribes. We work with some of the treaty rights and intertribal groups, and then tribal colleges and universities. We've had a lot of student undergraduate research interns working with us during the summer, and we've had pretty strong relationships with some of the tribal colleges in the region, as well as even beyond. Salish Kootenai College is another one that we work with quite a bit. How does this work? We have to meet with the tribes, listen and walk the land and canoe the waters together. We form that relationship. We heard a lot about relationships. This is the only way this work works. Developing those research protocols was really important so that we're all on the same page and we hold ourselves accountable. Our research needs to give back to the community. So we engage in community activities. I do things like I'm doing right now to talk about it. And fundamentally, we have to respect tribal sovereignty in this work. So the tribes are really leading it. signing those agreements, the tribes can say, we're done. We don't want any more of this research to go out. And that's okay. That's their sovereign right. We talk a lot about who owns the data. And yeah, finally, this is the last slide I have, and I'm right on time. Really, these partnerships, I get asked all the time, how do we integrate traditional knowledge into natural resources, natural resource management? And really the only way to do this is to have these partnerships, have opportunities to listen to each other, opportunities to canoe the waters together, to walk the lands together. And as we form that partnership or those relationships, we will be able to start incorporating more and more Indigenous knowledge and having the Indigenous people leading this natural resource. Like we see here, we heard that nice example in Prairie Island, some of these other communities that are restoring and protecting wild rice. So with that, I'm done. Miigwech. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Mike. That is really, really incredible to hear about some of the work that you're doing with your research. And we're so grateful that you were here tonight to share about that. And I can see in the Q&A that we have a lot of questions. I have not yet checked Facebook, but if you're watching from Facebook Live and you have questions for any of our presenters, please put them in the chat. And I will scroll through and try to get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have left. So I'm going to ask all of our presenters to turn their cameras on. And then I'm just going to see, let's see here. So I'm just going to read off the questions, and then whoever wants to answer can answer, unless somebody specifically wants to hear an answer from a specific person. But I'll just start reading the questions. Let's see. Somebody asked, what's the tiller in the diagram? I think that was referring to one of Gabby's diagrams. Gabby, I can try and go back in the presentation too. Let's see.
There was like a little piece of the plant that was kind of growing up, and the arrow said tiller.
Okay. In this one. Okay. Okay, and then the next question is, why does wild rice contain trace amounts of metals?
I can start off answering this. I know Mike and Gabby can answer it way better, but it's mainly because of pollution. So wild rice is really good at absorbing trace metals, but that's not good for people who want to eat it. But fortunately, you can wash a lot of it off. So thoroughly rinsing off your rice before cooking it, and then using a lot of water is said to help with that. But specifically why, I'm going to hand it to Mike or Gabby.
That's a Gabby one.
Oh man, I was hoping you would answer that one. I'm not too sure about most of the other heavy metals, but I know that wild rice has kind of the similar issues that the store-bought rice that you see in the stores, having high amounts of arsenic in it. From what I understand, it's just kind of that the mucky substrate that it grows in is kind of a perfect place for those heavy metals to kind of collect in there. And with the dense root systems that it has, wild rice is able to take up some of those heavy metals. I'm not sure which heavy metals exactly. Mike, if you want to expand on that at all, feel free to.
No, I'm not. At this point, my knowledge is done. I don't have anything to add to that.
I think it's mainly trace amounts of lead and cadmium that you need to watch out for with wild rice that can really it's trace amounts, but it's still dangerous. So yeah, I think just being careful to wash it is important.
Our next question, which actually isn't really a question but a statement, I can't see who sent it because it was sent anonymously, but somebody said that Lake Hiawatha was originally called Rice Lake. So I don't know if anybody can verify that. Awesome. Somebody asked, what does pseeŋ translate to? I can answer that, but it just translates to wild rice. Can you share some of the historical practices for maintaining, cultivating, and tending to wild rice beds?
I think many tribes that I've sort of talked to, you have either wild rice chiefs or people that are very knowledgeable about when and how to harvest. So again, it's a really sensitive plant. So if you go in too early, you can damage the seeds that are ripening, you can damage the stalks. Obviously, if you go too late, it could all be fallen into the water. Some years there's quite a bit, and it's very abundant, and other years are less abundant. So I think our communities had structures for the maintenance of that. Reading Brenda Child's book on Ojibwe harvesting and wild rice, women were really, she makes a pretty convincing case that women were really the folks that were in charge of this, that were really looking out for how to harvest that rice. And in fact, we hear a lot about the connection of water and women as protectors of that water. And this is a similar, rice is growing in that water. It's a similar thing. Sometimes there was the binding. I don't know if someone else wants to talk about that, but families can bind rice, and it kind of separates, and you can see where the different beds are for the different families that are going to be harvesting there. I don't know if someone else wants to add too, that'd be great.
Yeah, sorry, my video I know is a little bit wonky here, but so I hope the audio is good. But I think just one thing I wanted to mention, and this goes with any plant that you are harvesting, is that making sure that you're practicing sustainable harvesting practices. And a lot of that comes from like in our communities, a lot of it comes from that generational knowledge of the land and the plants that you're working with, being able to kind of read the environment, have that close relationship with the land, so that you're able to see those really key details about when to harvest, how much to harvest, things like that. So I think that's just something that I wanted to add in also.
Thank you for your answers. Somebody else was wondering, does wild rice grow in beaver flowages, and what is the relationship between beavers and rice?
Yeah, so my understanding of wild rice and beavers is that they do not have that great of a relationship, because the beavers, when they build their dams, when they build their homes, they're cutting off that water flow that wild rice needs to sustain itself. I don't know too much about kind of beavers and exactly what a beaver flowage is, but my general understanding is that the two do not mix well.
I'll add, I have a new student, another citizen Potawatomi tribal member starting at the U, and she's really, really interested in the relationships with beaver and wild rice. And I think we'll have better answers for this after she's done kind of looking at things, and also wanting to talk with folks about again, that historical understanding. The muskrat was shown there, and that's really important. As scientists, one of the things that some of the earth science people, the hydrologists, and looking at water flows, etc., as they were looking at wild rice, or even the water chemistry, trying to figure out what's going on, we tend to lose something if we don't think about our traditional stories. So for us, is having muskrat bringing that muck up from the bottom, right, to form our earth here. And there has to be a relationship there with that muskrat. We have stories about beaver as well. I think it will help us understand the system and help bring the wild rice back where it needs to come back, to understand sort of our traditional stories and how we kind of look at their relationships, because we're all related, as we've seen in this really nice talk here tonight.
Our next question is, can you speak more about how wild rice is an annual plant and contributes towards its resiliency in climate change?
Did you go again? I can't tell if Gabby froze there. No. I think one of the beautiful things about being an annual plant and being a plant that ripens at different times, being a plant that's very diverse across the landscape. So one lake is going to look different than another lake. The river might be a little different. Different families know where, like, how the rice tastes, how it looks, long grain, short grain. There's all sorts of characteristics. Rice is very diverse in its characteristics. That being an annual plant means that as each year, the plants that are coming back are seeds that survive. So as the climate is changing in a slow manner, I would think that just the processes of breeding itself over time will help it be very resilient. I don't know if that's what Leah was getting at in the question, but that's how I would answer it, because the rice has an opportunity. Those plants that survive and make seeds are going to be better adapted as we move forward the next year for some of these changes. I think that's how I'd answer.
The last question that I have here on Zoom, I have yet to check Facebook for questions, but if you guys think of any more questions, please feel free to send them in. And if you have any questions for Cole, I know I have it listed on the screen, but you can email the questions to me and I'll make sure that it gets to him so that he can answer your questions. But the last question that we have on Zoom is, was wild rice more prevalent throughout southern Minnesota before major alterations were made to the environment? What could be done to restore wild rice habitat there?
Yeah, I can speak on that real quick. So yeah, it was a lot more prevalent in the southern part of Minnesota. Reasons for this change included things like dams, other ways that water and hydrology was altered as well. So I think kind of starting with looking at what currently would be suitable wild rice habitat, thinking about how we could re-alter the landscape to kind of reflect more of what it would have been in back in the day. I know there's a lot of areas where that's not possible because of all the different development and infrastructure that's been put in place, but kind of looking at where could we put it now with some slight alteration, where could we continue to expand its population. But yeah, the southern part of Minnesota did have lots of wild rice in it.
And I'll just add too, I think the leadership from the Dakota people in the restoration that's happening is really going to help restore these landscapes across the board, because this is where they're really working in areas that have been, like that Prairie Island, that rice wasn't there. It really wasn't. In all these land uses, I'll say agriculture, the way that has happened, tiling the fields, draining wetlands, all of these things have impacted, and we have all that farming kind of in the southern part of the state. So it's huge.
I've got a couple more questions are rolling in through Zoom, and then I've got a few on Facebook Live as well. So next question is there a better way of washing the rice before cooking it? Would hot water soak before rinsing make a difference? And this is actually kind of similar to somebody else on Facebook asked, is there a difference in using hot or cold water to wash away the toxins? Which I feel like they kind of relate. So I don't know, Jenna, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say cold water. Cold water is best to wash wild rice in, because you're gonna boil it anyway. So, but cold water is what I was always taught to do in terms of how you would wash it, and then use lots of water, because that will help soak up and make sure that everything kind of steams out in a good way. So yeah, I would say cold water, and then because you're gonna boil it anyway, but just use lots of water to boil it, more than you would think, I guess.
I also just want to add that, if you're not washing your rice to get any sort of contaminants off, you should just wash your rice anyways. Because I remember one of my roommates early on in college didn't wash their rice ever, and it always tasted like mud. So if you're not going to wash it off for the contaminants, wash it off for the taste.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say you get those little crispy worms in there.
Well, nobody likes muddy or wormy rice, so or
Yeah.
metal-filled rice, toxic-filled rice. So wash your rice. Our next question is there any effort to reestablish wild rice in Rice Creek in the Twin Cities? And then in parentheses, from Forest Lake to Circle Pines to Fridley.
Not that I know of. I would check with like the local parks there, or whoever manages that creek and the parks around there, because they would know if they're trying to reestablish it. But yeah, I don't know if there's a better way of knowing. Mike or Gabby.
Yeah, I don't know either. I will say it's almost every tribe in these regions is working on restoring wild rice. And one of the things I'd like to do sometime with a student is really talk to each of the natural resource departments to see what they're doing and what they think has been working, because there's a lot of, we have conferences, so we do share a lot of information, but I think coming together a little bit around that, like who's actually doing this, what are the people trying, are they doing the mud balls, are they doing other ways of seeding, are they doing in lakes, rivers, what does it look like? And I think we can really learn from each other. And I'm hoping as we move forward, we would be able to say, oh yeah, all these restoration projects are happening all over these different areas. But no, I don't know what's happening, if anyone's doing that at Rice Creek.
I also live in Fridley, and I have heard about other restoration projects happening in Rice Creek, wild rice specifically. I have not heard anything about that. Let me see. We've got a couple more questions rolling in here. How is ricing managed today? What is the role of traditional management, tribal governments, and of Minnesota state agencies?
That's probably a me question. I'll try to explain. I don't know if I might be not totally accurate, but how I would answer that is, our tribes have natural resource and environmental departments. They're very engaged with the restoration and management of the wild rice. There's often also they work in conjunction with, especially the Ojibwe communities, which I'm more familiar with, working with rice chiefs to actually, like I mentioned before, like where do we harvest, when do we harvest, maybe this year we shouldn't be harvesting. So working really closely with them, working closely with the community. Also, there's been big efforts by both tribal government as well as the natural resource departments and community organizations to get youth and others doing rice camps. So bringing those tradition back of coming together and around the harvest time, so that we can all learn from each other how to do this. It's something, I had one slide that showed the harvesting, but it is something that's really important for us to get youth, elders, and everybody in between out together, talking and learning from each other. The state of Minnesota has ricing permits, so they're managing some of the waters for ricing from people that don't have those that aren't allowed anymore to exercise those treaty rights. So my tribe is in Oklahoma. I need to get a state permit to go wild rice harvesting here. They're tracking permits. I'm not sure how much of the actual harvest they're tracking. Some of the intertribal groups, and I'm starting to go long here, I'm sorry. Intertribal groups like Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission are tracking both wild rice lakes and how they are faring, as well as the harvest itself from some of their members. So they're keeping an eye on that. And then finally, the state has sulfate mandates for water quality. So the state is sampling some of the lakes and making sure that they don't have too much sulfate in it, so that would negatively impact the rice, so that water quality. And the tribes are doing that as well.
I have a couple more questions to go through. I just wanted to take a quick pause on questions and let everybody know that we have a survey that we would like for folks to fill out. It really helps us to build upon our programming and find out what sort of plants and information people want to learn about in these webinars. So I put the link to the survey in our the Facebook Live comments. And then I also put the link in the chat. Somebody will have to let me know if they're not able to access it. If you aren't able to access it in the Zoom chat, I will be sending a follow-up email after the event that will have a link to the survey as well. So anybody that registered will get that link. And then the last couple of questions, somebody asked, oh, I see now that the survey link isn't visible in the Zoom chat. So I'll try to get that fixed while we're answering the next couple of questions. Somebody asked, aren't the toxins and heavy metals within the rice itself also? Will it just rinsing it remove any of the effects of water pollution?
Sorry, I'm just gonna look at the question again. Yeah, rinsing it does remove effects of of water pollution. I think you'd be kind of shocked at how many toxins and heavy metals are within things, but by rinsing it, you can significantly reduce the amount of those toxins and heavy metals. So I think, but like within the wild rice, I can't say for sure, but I know that rinsing really does help.
Okay, I tried adding the survey back into the Zoom chat again. Like I said, the survey will also be sent in an email. So for some reason, if I'm not able to get the chat working, which I apologize for that, I will be sending the survey link after the webinar is done. So the last question that we have is, and I think that this is an answer for everybody, is what makes wild rice personally valuable to you guys as the presenters?
I'll let Gabby Menomin go first.
Yeah, so what makes it personally valuable? So I mean, for me, my last name can translate to wild rice. My last name, actually, just for some personal background on me, actually comes from Chief Menominee, but Menomin being a key part of that, meaning wild rice. So, that's my last name, but also just the fact that it's, been such a huge, important part of my community. My dad has stories about ricing when he was a kid with his grandpas and stuff like that. So historically been a major part of my community, even within my family. I have some great stories with that. So that's for me.
I can jump in. I have a couple of reasons. One, and Gabby kind of hits on it too, but my Potawatomi ancestors were removed to Oklahoma, Kansas, and then Oklahoma, and so that connection with wild rice is really strained. So I've given wild rice to some of even the elders in my family, and I remember like one of our leaders, elders, she was saying, I don't know how to cook this. Yeah, that's why.
All right. Well, I think that I see we're already over on time. I think that pretty much concludes our presentation. unless any of our presenters have any like final thoughts or things that they want to share about rice. I know that that was kind of a good question to wrap it up, like personal connections to wild rice. But if nobody has anything else to add, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who attended the webinar, all of our presenters. This was really an amazing evening. So much knowledge that was shared. I feel like I'm going to have to rewatch this to be able to soak in all of the information that was shared. It's really cool. I had a really great time, and I hope that everybody watching did too. Don't forget to fill out that survey, and I'll leave you with one last question for our presenters. Does anybody know how rice says goodbye? I hope to see you a grain soon. But I really, really hope that that made somebody laugh out there in the crowd. I'm sitting here in an empty room, so I have no idea if anybody finds that funny. I really hope they do. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you all so much for attending. This was a great evening. We'll have our next Gifts of the Plant Nation sometime this winter. So stay tuned, subscribe to our email newsletter, and follow us on social media to stay tuned for the next Gifts of the Plant Nation webinar. And thank you all so much. This was awesome.
Miigwech, everybody.